Let's sort out the problems of the world, hey, with Kristy McSweeney from PR Counsel, of course, and Stephen Senatiempo, the breakfast radio host at 2CC in Canberra. Thanks both for joining me. Let's go to you first, Kristy. In Melbourne tonight, how do you reckon this will go down? We saw the crowd booing Albo at the tennis the other night. Now he says apparently Australians can trust him.
Look, I think that it's very, very clear the Prime Minister has broken a promise. He's broken a promise that he has committed to over successive months and years. He's broken a promise that went to an election. It's quite an irony that in the week that Scott Morrison departed, Anthony Albanese stood up and said, look, the only policy that we are going to repeal to give cost of living relief is a coalition policy and Scott Morrison's signature policy, which points to a view of the government thinking that all their other policy positions where they could provide cost of living relief are okay. The only policy they've so far moved on to provide cost of living relief to the Australian public is the coalition's tax policy. Now, I think it will land well. The government is in full spin throttle, but there's no doubt the coalition's attack of a promise has been broken will also land well. Are Australians too concerned that politicians break their promise? I think they all do.
No, I disagree. I reckon he's blown his credibility, and I reckon voters remember that. They consider all sorts of other factors, but it means he can't throw around the word like trust anymore. It's laughable. Have a listen to him today.
Australians can trust me to be prepared to make difficult decisions, not the easy decision. That is the priority that I have, putting people before politics.
There you go, Stephen. Albo says Australians can trust him to make difficult decisions. He's deluded. He must know now that all Australians think the one thing they know about Albo is we can't trust him.
Yeah, trust me, I'll only lie to you when it's for your own good. Look, I think at least he's being consistent. I don't think there's a promise that they made leading into the election that they have kept, other than a very, very expensive referendum. Look, the reality is, Chris, though, I think people expect politicians are going to lie to them. The fact that a vast number of Australians are going to end up with a few extra dollars in their pocket will probably work in his favour. And I think it's actually going to probably work as a pretty good wedge against the coalition here, who have got to be very careful how they respond to this. By all means, attack the broken promise. But, you know, a coalition government that says, well, hang on, we're not going to support tax cuts, puts them in a very precarious position, I think.
Well, hang on a second here. I'll talk to David Littleproud about this later in the program. But the point is, if you do nothing, if they block any laws, if they could from Labor, if you do nothing, the tax cuts still come in on July the 1st as legislated and as Labor promised to support them. Why shouldn't the Liberals oppose any changes to that, Kristy McSweeney? Because it's legislated, Labor promised to keep it, and you're still giving tax cuts.
It's legislated, absolutely, from 1 July. And again, this is a policy taken to the election. Coalition policy or not, Australians voted at the last election for an Albanese government who backed in these tax cuts. It was a tax plan voted on by the Australian public. Now, people talk about mandates. This isn't quite a mandate because it's not their policy, but it is certainly one they took to the people, and the Australian people voted them in based on an analysis of what was economically beneficial for them and their family.
Yeah. We'll see. Good luck, I say, running this argument, because I don't think it'll go well for them at all as long as the coalition holds their nerve and stick by what they've put in place already. Let me go to banking, because I think it's a big issue for a lot of viewers, and that is Bank West, owned by Commonwealth Bank, not a huge bank, a pretty big bank, but it's a subsidiary, a factory of CBA, so it's part of a big organisation, shutting down more branches. And it's talking about going solely digital. Obviously, that makes it pretty profitable, Stephen. And a lot of us do all our banking online and occasionally through ATMs. But there's a backlash for some consumers. A lot of people want to be able to go to the bank with their cash, or to get their cash, or to deal with cheques when they feel like it. And those services are rapidly disappearing.
Yeah, you wonder what benefit we got out of the Banking Royal Commission in the end. And this isn't just a problem for Bank West. If you look at the rural areas surrounding Canberra, we're seeing bank branches close left, right and centre. Even in Canberra itself, we're seeing bank branches close left, right and centre. I think there's one NAB branch left in Canberra, from what I understand. Look, I'm not a person that goes into bank branches very often, but at the end of the day, we pay a lot of money to the banks to look after our money. The fact that they charge cash handling fees these days, when once upon a time it was an expectation that that's what banks did, you need to sometimes be able to talk to somebody face to face. The biggest problem we have with most organisations these days is an inability to communicate, and the opportunity to walk through a door and speak to a human being is a big thing for customers. And I think there will be a backlash against this, and so there should be.
What we have here is a failure to communicate. Wasn't that some famous movie line at some stage? Yeah, I agree with you. And the idea that we've got some branches now without cash just seems absurd. I want to go on to cigarettes and vaping. And Kristy, I grew up with the whole thing where cigarette commercials were on television and they sponsored all the major sports. And we've been through the whole process, of course, with tax increases, advertising bans, and they've pretty much reduced smoking to a pretty small percentage of the population now. And so governments are turning their sights on vaping. Here's the latest ad from the New South Wales government against vaping.
Woke up gasping for air and just rushed me to hospital.
My lungs just felt like they were on fire.
And I'm coughing black stuff into a tissue.
For me to all of a sudden have lung pain in my 20s, I really did think I was going to die.
It's kind of familiar, Kristy, because we've seen this sort of stuff against cigarettes in the past, haven't we? Do you think it'll work, and do you think it's necessary?
Gee, the alcohol and gambling lobby have really got away with it, haven't they, Chris? Look, that ad is great to highlight the dangers of vaping to young people, but the reality is there's a flawed fines and enforcement and a flawed retail model in Australia. Vaping's actually been illegal in Australia since 2021. You can't buy them. So all the kids that are addicted to vaping are addicted to these illegal imported vapes that are on the streets as a result of organised crime infiltration. The reality is the state and federal governments just aren't doing enough to enforce and to fine people and to go after organised crime. And that's why we've seen the spate of fire bombings, particularly in Melbourne, with organised crime gangs intimidating small business out of selling legitimate products in favour of their illegal vaping products. And the kids are getting hold of them.
Yeah. Well, it's a new problem, and you've got to get on top of it. So maybe the advertising will help. We will see. No doubt other governments will get involved in that as well. Just an issue I want to finish up on with you, Stephen. We've often talked about dog attacks on this program in the past, and I'm really concerned about them, especially when they affect children. But we highlighted last year a woman in Perth who was nearly killed by her own two Rottweilers. Her name is Nikita. The dogs were called Harlem and Bronx. They ripped her face apart. Her nearly lost an arm. Anyway, they put the two dogs down. Now she's effectively written about how much she misses the dogs and loves them. She says, Harlem and Bronx, you made my life worth living. I will never stop loving you. Do you get that, Stephen?
Yeah, I've got to say, I do. You probably should have spoken to Kristy about this, because she's got a vicious attack dog at her place. But look, I understand people love their dogs. No, sorry, apologies to Maggie. Moving right along. Look, no, I do understand it. I mean, obviously something sparked this attack from these two dogs. Dogs don't just attack spontaneously in most cases. And, I understand that, even when they do attack you, you still had an attachment to these animals.
Sheepers, creepers. They nearly killed her. What sort of dog have you got, Kristy?
Look, Stephen's referring to my Shih Tzu Chihuahua, who believes she is a Rottweiler. Not really an attack dog. Exactly.